If you're struggling to eke out a living, it's fair to say that gourmet coffee would not be your number one priority. Maybe number two. A roving band of bad guys hoarding your stuff would make it nigh on impossible to think about shelling out money for premium grounds. But once your hired guns fix the problem by murdering the marauders, maybe then you can think about buying some of the good stuff. Okay, you need to cross the border into America first, but then, yes, you should look into what you could order from Sparkplug Coffee. And be careful crossing that border. I heard there's some kind of wall. Big, beautiful, magnificent, beautiful wall with slats in it. Anyway, Sparkplug Coffee has the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that can be found in Canada. Now, I just suggested that the fictional characters in the Magnificent Seven would have to be on American soil to order it. Sparkplug doesn't go to Mexico, but our Yankee friends can get orders shipped within a week. We Canadians will get that stuff shipped that quickly too, but we will get free shipping. And you don't have to feel left out if you don't want a full dose of caffeine. Those who like to drink or need to drink half-calf or decaf can get that just as easily as they can the jolty stuff. And there's a wealth of blends and roasts available, including rotating seasonal blends. It's going to be December in just a few days, so yeah, look for something that matches up well with Christmas, or Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa. Christmakaza, as I dubbed it in one of our trivia games. What will make this even better is starting up a membership in Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. Being in that group will get you perks and deals, plus you'll save money on every order. You can also customize to get your orders when it suits your life and your schedule. So if you're in the middle of a gunfight and can't spend any time worrying about deliveries just now, you can pause or even cancel your membership. Oh, watch out! There's somebody shooting at you. That flexibility can't be found in a typical Coffee of the Month club, and this is not that. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES is your destination. You will save 20% off your next order by using our HYES promo code for Have You Ever Seen. You knew that. But as much as Sparkplug is awesome, you're here to find out what two people think of a John Sturges Western. Bev, how about cueing us in?
And action. Have you ever seen
The Magnificent Seven? Hello and hi, fellow fans of the Flickr shows, and thank you for finding the 551st edition of Have You Ever Seen? We take a stroll back into the past to check out a motion picture that just might be a classic and see what we think of it here in the modern era. And we spoil it, whether it really is a classic or not. I'm the guy who's been to Mexico several times, but I've never been on a horse, never fired a shotgun, and never fought a vicious bandit while I was down there. Make it Ryan Ellis. And here's the crackerjack half of this talkie duo who will do any job for $20, even if it might kill her, my wife Bev.
That's me.
Crackerjack. I undersold that, by the way. Bev's going rate, at least $40. All right, the coming attractions trivia for this week's picture, the last of November. The Magnificent Seven, the Mag 7, is of course a remake of Akira Kurosawa's legendary Seven Samurai. Only 3 of the 7 samurai survived to the end of that movie. How many of the Mag 7 make it to the end of their movie?
Just 3?
Same number.
Is it the same samurai? The leader, his right-hand man, and the wacky guy who wouldn't take no for an answer?
Kurosawa star was Mifune. I think he's the horse Buckles representative, and that guy does survive, but I think it's Mifune who does first, or early on at least, in that one. So no, not exactly. But yes, the leader, I believe, survives. I think the right-hand man. But in this, of course, it is Yul Brynner, Steve McQueen, and Horst Buckles. What a name.
What a name.
And how about this? The 2 stars don't die during the movie, Brynner and McQueen, but Brynner and McQueen were the first 2 of the 7 who died in real life, and quite a long time ago, too. McQueen was 1980, I think. Brynner was in the mid-80s, and a lot of them lived way beyond that. Coburn was still alive until, I think, just a few years ago. He won an Oscar in 1998, so almost 20 years after McQueen died. But here's a sub-question, because I wish I'd thought of this before. This is actually an opinion, though, not a trivia thing. Who's your favorite of the 7? Now that you've seen it, who's your number 1 favorite?
McQueen, baby. It's Vin. And before you say, oh, it's just because he's the hottest one, it's totally because he's the hottest one.
Oh, he's pretty great in this, though, too. I've never been his hugest fan.
Cool. You say who's the best looking of these 7 actors. It's probably, let me try this, Horst Buckles. Okay. He's a very good looking guy, but his character's just such a clown. Whereas Steve McQueen is hot in this movie.
You said the same thing in The Great Escape, which we covered a long time ago.
He's a good-looking guy, but truly it's about that swagger.
And this was a star-making role for him, because he'd been in some movies, but this was the big breakout for him. They're all pretty cool, but I'd go with the coolest of them all, and that's James Coburn, at least in this one. Although McQueen is right behind him at number 2, and it's not like Brynner doesn't bring it too. He's quite good in the lead role.
I wish that the movie paid more attention to the character of Lee. I found him maybe the most interesting of the 7 because he stands out for being a dandy and for having PTSD, but they never really dig that deep into him or Harry Luck. Britt is a strong silent type. Doesn't seem like there's that much going on under the surface other than he's just so cool.
That's why I like him.
It's just so cool.
Bronson is pretty good in this too.
Yeah, he's good. He's surprisingly a forgettable member of
He's playing Bronson.
Yeah.
People always say John Wayne played John Wayne in movies, and he showed more range, and we've seen a lot of the better roles for John Wayne over the years. We've covered them. Red River is a good example of that. Even Rio Bravo and The Searchers is a deeper role than it might seem at first, because of his history and what maybe is really going on with his daughter, maybe not his niece. But Bronson, and we've covered him 3 times. Great Escape, Once Upon a Time in the West, and this, cool, good performances. Not like he's bad in these films, but it's the pretty much exact same character all 3 times.
So him and McQueen are both in The Great Escape.
So is Coburn.
And so is Coburn.
Coburn and Bronson are 2 of the 3 that actually got out and stayed out, too, in the movie.
Oh, really?
McQueen got out, but they caught him at the very end, so he's back in the cooler again. And they killed a lot of the guys who got out. The Nazis did.
Yeah. How many years after this?
3.
3 years? So obviously they were right on the heels of working together, even though you hear notoriously about how many difficulties there were on set just because there was a lot of swinging dicks on set. Like
McQueen
a lot
especially,
of egos.
But they all were. And Brynner actually wanted McQueen. He requested him. I think he sought him out. And then when they were shooting, he realized that may have been a mistake because McQueen did all kinds of things. I like Steve McQueen more the last year or so of covering now 2 movies that he's done, because I covered Bullet a few months ago. Robert Vaughn's in that too, by the way. He's just the antagonist in a way. It's not that he's the bad guy, but he's the DA, and McQueen's always battling him almost as much as he is battling the villains in Bullet. But I like Bullet more seeing it this time, a few months ago, and I like this movie. I've always liked this movie. But I think my problem with him has been some of the stories about what he did during this film and some of the things with The Towering Inferno, where he and Newman had to have the same number of lines. Are you 4? But
come on.
He is he's been dead a long time, a terrific actor and such presence. And this movie may be the best example of any of the movies we've covered. He's great in The Great Escape, but his character isn't that relevant, I don't think, either. He certainly is in this. And the Bullet is the main character, of course.
And there was a version of the script when he first got cast where Vin is kind of like Britt. Just
barely
cool
speaks.
Guy who barely speaks, and he does a lot, but he's the strong silent type, and Yul Brynner, as Chris, does most of the talking. I mean, he has that leadership quality, he has that gravitas. McQueen just raised such a stink about it that they wrote all these lines for him.
And he delivered them well.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
got
sure.
Good scenes, good speeches.
Like I said, he's my favorite in the movie. When he's not on screen, you're waiting for him to come back.
Where's Poochie? Okay, broad gestures. We're going to talk about my favorite ever McQueen moment in a few minutes. But broad gestures, think about that when Brynner calls Chico over, when Chico's following them. The big, come on gesture. And we'll talk about a few more later on. So Broad Gestures was released by United Artists on October 12th, 1960. There are conflicting reports about how well it did at the box office. It seems to be that it did well in international markets, not so much here at home. Wikipedia says it made just shy of $10 million, but the numbers, the website I use instead of Box Office Mojo, because Box Office Mojo only goes back to 1977 or something, they don't even rank it in the top 15 that year, even though that $10 million would put it in the top 10. Maybe the $10 million is because of re-releases. That could be what it is.
It's crazy because, in my mind, this movie is a hit.
That was a hit!
It was a hit! It looms so big in the public consciousness as just one of those movies that always gets mentioned when you talk about great westerns, and I feel like people who love movies, people who love westerns, especially dudes, love this movie. I'm surprised to learn that it wasn't a blockbuster.
And 1960 was still an era when westerns were really popular.
And it did well overseas, maybe because it's based on a Japanese film, so maybe that sensibility was already more appealing to people not in Hollywood. I love the westerns we've watched, but the westerns we've watched have not been a fair example of the westerns that were popular in Hollywood over the years. The westerns that have become classics are the much more subversive westerns, and this was right at the time between when the really polished Hollywood white hat, black hat westerns were losing popularity and being replaced with the much more subversive westerns, like you already mentioned, The Searchers and Sam Peckinpah and the Sergio Leone movies, more modern version of westerns. This was a bit of a bridge in between, and I think in my mind, because I watched them all mixed up with each other, it's easy to forget that you kind of have to put it in context of what was popular at the time and when things were coming out. So maybe the public wasn't quite ready for something that, to my mind, to my sensibility, seems like a pretty safe movie, safe Hollywood film, but maybe in 1960 it was already feeling kind of subversive.
Well, anyway, Beverly, the story of a movie that's 63 years old is not likely to be fresh on people's minds. Please tell our audience what The Magnificent Seven is about and give them the skinny on this classic Western.
A small village in Mexico is tormented by bandits, so they cross the border to buy weapons to fight back, and there they meet Yul Brynner's Chris Adams, a gun for hire who convinces them to let him put together a team to fight back for them. He recruits 5 men and rejects the 6 who won't take no for an answer, so they become 7.
Until the broad gesture.
Yeah, exactly. The gang fortifies the village and trains the locals, and when the time comes, they succeed at driving back the bandits. But it's a temporary victory because, as they learn, the bandits are starving and fighting for their own survival. Some villagers turn coat and conspire with the bad guys, making the gunfighters leave. But, driven by the relationships they fostered during their time with these humble farmers, the Magnificent Seven stay to fight, this time taking out the bandits' leader and ridding the village of them for good, but taking massive losses in the process as only 3 are left standing in the end.
Of course, the bad guy's Eli Wallach.
Great performance, too.
And he was tremendous in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He's the ugly in that. Or, in a nutshell, gig workers die on the job. I feel like I've used that one before. 57% of them take a job and don't make it home. Because 4 of the 7, like we say, and 7 Samurai also, never come back. And Harry Luck thinks this is bigger than just the pittance, the $20 they're getting, and barely getting enough food. They're getting better food than the farmers are, but they give it up to the kids and the other people in the camp, presumably more than just that one time. So they're not even getting fed all that well. And they get humiliated and all kinds of things happen. We'll get to that in a few seconds. But there's a lot of numbers on this movie. Let's talk about that now. 89% of critics like The Magnificent Seven. Magnificent Seven. The average is 8 out of 10. There are 46 reviews on the site, and 87% of audiences, almost the same number as the critics. We said this is a remake of Kurosawa's 7 Samurai. There were also 3 sequels. One that had Brynner, the only one that came back for any of the sequels. Then that was it. The rest of the movies were just 7 people that were doing the same basic thing, but none of these actors. And of course, 4 of them did die. There was the 2016 remake with Denzel and Chris Pratt. Also, versions of this, 3 Amigos, very underrated 80s comedy. I love that one. A Bug's Life, and one of the greatest movies of all time, certainly one of the greatest comedies of all time, Galaxy Quest. And even The A-Team, one of my favorites when I was a kid on TV, has got some kind of similarities to this movie, or this storyline. As for Rotten Tomatoes numbers, by the way, the 2016 version is at 64%, so a fresh tomato, but not by much. Return of the Seven, the one that Brynner was in, the only one of the actors who came back for any of the movies, in 66, is at 13%, 1-3. But 7 Samurai, which we covered many years ago, 100% of critics, which is what it was then, obviously, and still is now. This was nominated for 1 Oscar and only 1. The right one, though. Elmer Bernstein's score. Dun, 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 dun. One of the greatest opening themes in any movie ever. The whole score is really good, and certainly worthy of the Oscar and some other plaudits I'll get to in a second. But that opening theme is up there with Superman, and, well, all the John Williams ones, really. 5 or 6 great John Williams ones, and Alfred Newman. I'm drawing a blank on Jerry Goldsmith.
When we were watching it, we were comparing it to Raiders of the Lost Ark, where that theme is perfect for the film, but also just an incredible piece of music that I think people will be listening to outside the film for generations. It's
been in so many properties, TV shows, and movies since, too. It didn't win, though. Exodus did. I don't know about the whole score on that, and by the way, I mentioned Paul Newman. He was in that movie. That's the one that the wrestler Mr. Perfect used for his entrance music, so it's da-dun, da-dun, da-dun. You recognize that at all?
Nope.
That's the main theme from Exodus.
Never seen Exodus, and I don't watch wrestling, so...
Fair enough, yeah. And Psycho, that same year, wasn't even nominated.
Come on. Wow. 2 very iconic scores right there.
Bernard Herrmann with Hitchcock, never nominated for a score for any of the movies he did with Hitchcock. This film made the National Film Registry in 2013, along with 6 films we previously covered: Gilda, which I just did very recently, Mary Poppins, Pulp Fiction, The Quiet Man, Roger and Me, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Magnificent Seven is 79th, or was 79th, on the top 100 thrills. Psycho was number 1. 2 great scores. Speaking of scores, this is 8th on the top 25 music scores. Pretty awesome to get into the top anything, even the top 25, let alone the top 10. Star Wars was number 1. And Mag 7 was nominated for 3 other AFI lists. The Top 100 Cheers, so most inspiring. The Western category of the Top 100 Genres, makes sense. And the 7 were up for the Top 50 Heroes on the Heroes and Villains list. Now, you'd never seen this before, right?
No.
I didn't think so, but we did see Seven Samurai. We covered it many years ago. It's basically the same story. We already know you're a big fan of McQueen. But this film, for all of its coolness, and for the most part a pretty fun movie, has got a big layer of sadness going on the whole time.
Yeah.
What'd you think of it?
I think it's a very good movie. Happens to not really be my jam, but it's still a very well-made movie with a great cast, excellent stunts, and of course, that out-of-this-world score.
John Sturges directed this. He's one of the underrated directors, I think. Richard Donner's a good example of that, too. A guy who did Superman, Lethal Weapon, The Goonies, The Omen. And yet you don't think of him as one of the great directors. Those are some excellent titles for one guy to have. With Sturges, you're talking about The Great Escape. And this, you're talking about a movie we just saw a few days before we saw Mag 7. Last Train from Gun Hill, which I've always loved. It's one of those movies, Tarantino does this all the time. One of my favorite movies by this director is blank. And you'll think, really? That's one of your favorite movies from that director? Well, for me, I would watch Last Train from Gun Hill even before I'd watch Great Escape or Mag 7. Now, just briefly, you liked it, right?
Yeah, I really did.
So that's Kirk Douglas and Anthony Quinn, and the subtext going on there is pretty awesome. Now, I've seen this movie many times. It wasn't like I forgot this, but it really hit me more this time. I mentioned a few minutes ago sadness? Mm-hmm. When we first meet Chris and Vin, they had nothing. Yeah. They go to this job. There's a nobility thing going on. They do the right thing for these people. Their friends die. They barely got out of this themselves. McQueen got hit by a bullet. He's not completely fine. He's riding off, but he's probably hurt in some kind of way. But what do they do now? Where do they go now? They had nothing before. They've done this job. They're not staying there like Chico is. What do they do now? That's the sadness. These guys are so good at this.
What were they going to do before they got this job?
That's why I say it's sad. What did they have to look forward to?
And they mention it over and over again. McQueen, this cool guy, this great gunfighter, is looking for a job in retail. Yul Brynner, I don't remember if they say what he's doing, but everyone that he comes across, they're down on their luck. And they're all middle-aged, too. So you have the character of Chico, who has
he's a kid.
Stars in his eyes. He's a kid. He's not even like a good enough gunfighter to be part of them, although he proves his worth by being pretty brave, especially by infiltrating the bandits' camp, learning some pretty important information, taking initiative there. But he's so young and so green, and he has stars in his eyes. He's just impressed by these gunslingers, and this is kind of the bridge between the classic Hollywood Western, where the gunslinger is the hero, period. We don't wonder why this hero doesn't have a family and doesn't have a job and where they get their money from and how they're paying for all those great white hats. You don't think about that. It's not really important to the viewer, but here's a movie that addresses that these people would have had pretty empty lives, and they're all at a stage in their life where they're like, now I envy the farmers. When I was Chico's age, of course, I was so enamored with the adventurous lifestyle of being a gunslinger and being this tough guy. But now that I've lived this whole life, you have Lee, who's on the run from something, from the law, but part of his motive for joining the gang is that he needs to disappear for a while. You've got Vin, who, despite being a pretty competent guy, is looking for work. And I think he's the one that actually says the line, family, none.
Yes.
Money, none. Home, none.
It starts out being attachments, none. All these positives.
Yeah.
Because when that's going on, that scene, Chico likes what he's hearing about all these opportunities, and the adventure, I guess, is part of it. But that's, I think, when McQueen pipes up with the prospects, none. Family, none. All these other things you don't really have. And McQueen's character, and McQueen himself, is not supposed to be that old, I don't think. He's older than Chico, but not that much older. But the other guys are definitely, I think, supposed to be middle-aged or beyond, in a way, and this is almost all they have. And they do this job for food money, and they barely even get that because they very nobly give up their food to the starving villagers.
And you could apply this analysis of choosing a lifestyle to all kinds of things. In a Western, it would be gunslinging. But you could easily say, well, there's probably a lot of actors, even actors in this film, who reach middle age and go, what have I done? I was enamored by the Hollywood lifestyle, and here I am with this sporadic career that could fall apart at any time. And I don't have a family to show for it. I should have just stayed home and worked at the old savings and loan or whatever and raised a family and had a meaningful life. And you could say if you want to be a musician, if you want to be an athlete, that the hero worship and wanting to become the hero can lead to, even when you're successful, an empty life.
They could have been a crackerjack clerk. Crackerjack. I guess that phrase, by the way, wouldn't exist when they set this movie.
No?
Fine. I didn't know that till I read that online. Well, second build is actually Eli Wallach as Calvera. the villain, the bandit. And when we first meet him, he scares the farmers. He's very intimidating. He acts like a mobster, which is appropriate because the other time we've covered him so far was in The Godfather Part 3, where he was a mobster. But then we find out later on when Chico infiltrates their gang that they're starving and desperate too, which doesn't make it okay what they're doing by terrorizing villagers and stolen things from and killed people in their farm. But it isn't just a matter of a mobster like the characters in The Godfather, where they already have enough and they're wealthy and they're powerful, but we need a little bit more. We need to take over the drug trade. I don't want to. It's dirty business, but you already have enough. But Calvera's group are barely surviving themselves, and that's a very important scene when Chico finds that out. And I don't think that's why, but the villagers at one point basically say, we should give in, because they're going to come back for more. We can't keep doing this in the first place. And maybe there's a part of them that realizes he's just like us. He's just doing it differently than we're doing.
I think they're just afraid.
Well, they're probably
just
more afraid,
trying to do the safe thing, which would be giving in and saying, okay, fine. We're sorry that we got ideas that we could be free.
How many Westerns, though, show the bad guys in a scene like that where they're not begging, but they're not doing all right?
My favorite scene of the film is when Calavera turns to them and he's like, what are you doing? Why don't you come work for me?
I love that. He tries to recruit them.
Because you realize in that moment, first of all, that gunslingers like them aren't that far from criminals. We also learn that the town hides all their women because they're afraid that they will rape the women.
They being the seven.
They being the seven, which I think was directly pulled from Seven Samurai, right?
I think it was too, yeah.
Yeah, that's a detail in that film too. You know, when Seven Samurai came out, it was quite subversive to show that samurai were not necessarily honorable, that they also had hard lives and hard choices to make, much like the gunslingers in the Old West in Magnificent Seven.
These guys belong with Calvera's group more than they belong with the farmers, though.
Totally. That's like where a lot of people like them end up. Then you think, oh, that's probably where a lot of his group of bandits came from. They start off as guns for hire, and then they end up in a group like his where at least they feel like somebody's leading them and somebody can get them fed.
Yeah, the movie's got more depth than you might think. Now, the Mexicans are in the movie quite a bit. Nobody has any huge role. John Alonzo is one of the three, I believe, that goes to find what they think is going to be guns. And it ends up being that Chris says, no, hire men. It's cheaper than buying guns. I guess because the guys come with their own guns, and maybe there's a logic there. But one of the guys is John Alonzo, who became a cinematographer on things like Sounder and Chinatown, movies we've covered in the past. Now, did you notice the Mexican actors are always wearing clean clothes?
Yes.
Even though they're
white.
farmers, and it's white. And that's because the Mexican censors, they shot a lot of this movie in Mexico, also Arizona, but in Mexico. Mexican censors, or the Department of Filmmaking, whatever the hell they call it, said that they had to look clean and proper all the time. Which is just ridiculous. Even if they're wearing black, they wouldn't look this clean, let alone when they're wearing white.
There's probably tons of Hollywood films where Mexicans come across pretty poorly, and so they said,
that's
if you want
why,
to shoot here,
sure.
yeah, here's the rules. And good on them for shooting there. The difference it makes to go on location and shoot on location, to actually build the sets, to have those beautiful backdrops, and they have really lovely vistas in the film. It's shot on color. The technology was not brand new, but you can tell there's money in this film because they have beautiful camera movements, beautiful blocking and setups. Obviously the stars too, but a convincing set and shooting on location, and it really does a lot for the film to just physically be there.
Yeah. When we first meet Chris and Vin, though, is in the town where the Mexicans go, the three guys that go to try to buy guns. And I'm quoting here. We see the scene where the dude, what is it again? I think it's supposed to be Whit Bissell, I believe is the one, who wants to pay for the, this is the quote here, Indian, who isn't fit to be buried in Boot Hill is what they called it. You can't put him with the white people, I guess. And this guy wants to pay for this because he came across this man dying in the street. We never see the guy. Apparently he's a native. They call him Indian. And Chris volunteers to drive the hearse up there because why not? And he's not even going to get paid, I don't think.
No, he's just doing the right thing. I mean, it's an establishing scene where, look, here's our hero. He meets Vin, who also decides to help him out. And they do the right thing for nothing but the reward of getting a man buried in a cemetery instead of
they never met either.
Pauper's grave. Yeah, no.
And I think maybe the locals are starved for entertainment because they're so wrapped by what goes on here. It is pretty interesting. And of course, if you read the behind-the-scenes stuff, McQueen trying to upstage Brynner was right. I'm sure they didn't shoot the movie in sequence, but the first scene they have together, he's doing it two ways. First, he takes his hat off to look for where the sun is, and Brynner's just lighting a cigarette, and that was supposed to be that McQueen wanted to get noticed. The other one was when he shakes the shotgun shells. I don't think these are that big a deal.
No, it just makes the frame more interesting to me. I never found it distracting. But I think this is just two actors with massive egos. Yul Brynner was a huge star at this point. He was definitely the star of this film. But you think that would just be enough? Who cares? Oh, there was also rumors that because Brynner was shorter than McQueen, that he would build up little dirt piles so that when they had scenes together, he could stand on the dirt pile and match his height.
But McQueen would kick the dirt.
And McQueen would kick the dirt down. Sir, why do you care? What is this about? But I guess that's just egos for you.
Well, these weren't unknown. The other 6 weren't unknown. Horse Buckles was, if not unknown, not that well known. But McQueen had been on television shows. In fact, he lied to them about being hurt so he could shoot this movie, which would be harder to do now because you could find him social media, pictures, what have you, or just news that you wouldn't have had back then. He goes to Mexico and Arizona. You don't know he's done this. But it's, oh my God, my neck hurts. And it's fine. He's actually just making this other movie. But the other guys weren't unknown. Coburn and Brad Dexter, Bronson. He'd been in definitely some movies in the 50s, Bronson for sure. I believe Eli Wallach had done some films as well. Robert Vaughn. So it wasn't a matter of these guys were unknown and then Brynner was the star. But Brynner had been in The King and I and The Ten Commandments that same year. We've covered The Ten Commandments, not The King and I. And he won the Oscar for The King and I in 1956. So yes, he was by far the biggest name. But they weren't unknown either. The other scene I pointed out to you, I said, watch this scene. And you said, what? What's the big deal? When we covered Shane, the story that goes, and I think even Ebert wrote this in his review, is that when Jack Wilson comes to town, Jack Palance's character, he's walking his horse because Palance wasn't good on horses. But we watched the movie, we talked about it at the time, he's not. He's riding the horse. Maybe he doesn't even ride at all. He doesn't walk the horse into town. I don't know where that story came from. In this one, as they go by with down, they're crossing
the river.
Brynner's first, yeah, I guess it's the Rio Grande probably. And the Mexicans are interspersed with them as well, with the 7. But as they go up, I think McQueen's next, and then Coburn's somewhere in there and whatnot. They're all doing something to get noticed. It's supposed to be this whole big thing. Oh, they're upstaging Brynner. Well, Brynner's off camera now. McQueen supposedly scooped water out of the river to put on his head. You don't really see that exactly. You see his hat going. Coburn adjusts himself on the saddle. So, Brynner is gone. Brynner is off camera now. What is the big deal?
Yeah, you told me about that and I was watching the scene. What am I looking for here? It doesn't stand out at all. And if anything, it just makes for a more interesting mise en scène.
I think sometimes people will talk about things, and even in the case of Ebert, review things for films as if it's in the finished story that maybe was in some outtake, and it's not in the movie we're watching. You're wrong. And in this case, okay, so they did those things. And the hat and the shotgun shells and kicking the dirt, which isn't on film anyway. Oh, well. And this movie with their tomfoolery, if you will, maybe made the movie a little bit better. They definitely get along really well. They seem like guys who don't... Well, Chris knew some of these guys. He knew Harry from before. I think he knew Lee from before, right? But they didn't know Britt. They didn't know Bernardo, I don't believe. They heard about how he was just cutting wood and, I'll take the job, I could use some money. And Chico volunteered. He didn't know Vin until the whole thing with the hearse. Okay, I talked about broad gestures. There are 2 great ones when these guys first meet each other. First is one of Brynner's best things, I think, in the whole film. When the guy asks, after they do the whole thing with the hearse, they deliver the body, the one guy gets shot. You're not putting that guy in this grave. But they do. They come back, and the guy says, where are you headed? He gestures that way. Where you been? Back that way. Yeah. He gestures in front and behind him. Or maybe it's the reverse of that. But then the other one, of course, is when McQueen comes into the bar and talks with Brynner and the Mexicans. And he says he's been offered a job as a Cracker Jack clerk. But then when it's, how many you got? Brynner does the one finger hold up. And this is my favorite ever McQueen thing in any movie ever. It's when he goes, 2 with his 2 fingers. Make it 2, Utah. Just the best way of saying, I'm in. Mm-hmm. You don't need to even say I'm in. And it's really over the top. There's a lot of broad gestures. I talked about the whole, come on, kid, with Chico when they're actually on the road going to the town.
It doesn't feel like too much, though. Do you think? I don't feel like it's over the top.
No, I'm not saying that. Well, it could be a silent movie some of the times. When somebody says, how many guys you got, you could have a title card that says that. And then all you need is Brynner holding up 1 finger, cut to the other guy holding up 2 fingers. You don't need the dialogue. You don't need a title card for that whole thing. One of the reasons I like Britt, so the Coburn character, as much as I do, and apparently he wanted to play this character because he loves Seven Samurai and apparently watched it many times. He wanted to play the guy who is, I guess, more of a sword expert, although I guess they're all sword experts in a samurai movie. But anyway, he wanted to play the character that his commensurate character in this film, and he got to play that character. He mostly works with knives, though. He's great with the guns. His best line in the whole film, he doesn't really say very much, is when he and Chico are out and they have to kill Cavar's men, who are scouting, I guess. One of them rides away. He shoots. Great shot. Well, that's a 1 in a million shot. I was aiming for the horse. Yeah. It was the worst shot. I was aiming for the horse. That's his best line in the whole film. But he basically is the knife guy. And I'm not somebody who's big into knives, but it's a nice change of pace in a movie that's all about guns. For the most part, Bernardo, the Bronson character, uses a shotgun, so I guess that's what sets him apart as well.
All the characters have something about them that's worn out. They're all very good at what they do, but you have Harry Luck, who's broke and looking for a big score. You have Lee, who's on the run. You have Vin, who's also hard up, has nothing going on. And with Britt, you just really get the impression that he's been doing this for so long and he's so good at it that he's completely disaffected. He has this real numbness about everything he does.
Look, when we first meet him, when he says, "I won," with the whole thing where he throws the knife near the guy but doesn't hit him. The guy objects, "No, I shot before you actually threw the knife. Let's do it for real then." Then he throws the knife and he stabs the guy in the chest before he ever gets a shot off, proving that he actually did win the first time too.
This is the thing about the movie where it makes me roll my eyes a little bit. The way they're just so unaffected by everything. Unflappable, guns going off around them, people dying, all kinds of drama, and they barely blink an eye, they just light a cigarette. It's like the Western equivalent of the hero who's walking away from a building that's exploding behind them and they don't even break stride. And Britt is definitely super guilty of that, where he's so unaffected by everything that's going on around him.
Maybe he shouldn't be my favorite, but he's just so cool, though, too.
No, he is pretty cool. What do you like about this movie? We talked about my opinion. I know you love this movie, so what do you think makes it so great?
I love the fact that it is one of the more fun Westerns, and yet it's also got that layer of sadness.
Yeah, it's smart.
The fact that these guys really have nothing going on before or after. Not even half of them survive. They did a noble deed. They're rewarded, if you want to believe in heaven, I guess, going to heaven, except these guys have undoubtedly done some bad things, so maybe they're not going to heaven per se. But then you've also got the villagers at the very end. The old man speaks words of wisdom, and I don't think Chris even needed to hear those words of wisdom. He realizes that, no, we lost. We'll always lose. I think that's how Seven Samurai ends. Maybe not that exact dialogue, but same tone. The last shot of the entire movie is the 4 mounds of earth. And this one is these guys riding off.
It's the 2 guys riding off. Chico, who's the one who idealized them in the film and so badly wanted to be a gunslinger, at the end of this film is like, I fell in love with a girl here,
Petra.
And I'm going to become a farmer like my parents were. He looked down on his parents at some point in the film. They talk about that. But by the end of the film, he realizes what it's really like to choose one lifestyle after another.
I don't know if I believe that arc.
At the right choice.
He wanted the lifestyle that he had doing all this in the first place, and he is the Mifune surrogate, who also was the rabble-rouser of the group in the first place. Has he learned already? I don't think he's really learned. The story, the movie, says he's learned this lesson. He's going to settle for, well, it's not really settling, but he'll be with Petra and stay in this village. But I think it's more that the story goes that way, not realistically. I think he'd rather go off with those guys. So, what happens next? Nature doesn't take kindly to vacuums, so some other warlord swoops in and starts stealing from this village. Chico can't fight off a gang by himself. Well, the farmers are now trained somewhat, but that fight would mostly be Chico against dozens. So Chris, Vin, stay local. You might be called back to work again soon.
My take about that is that a little village like that, taking down a large group of bandits like they did, and killing the leader would discourage other criminals from trying to take advantage of them. And
Does they learn on social media what happened there?
Yeah, they talk, they write songs about it. That's like the 19th century version of social media. Is they write songs about these kinds of things, and then they pass on from group to group, and everybody hears about it. I'm sure rumors get around. The farmers themselves are bold enough to stand up for themselves and probably aren't going to let that happen again. But in general, they'll have a reputation from here on out of being a pretty tough village that can't be messed with.
And you asked me what I like about the movie. Of course, the score is such a huge part of it. It's hard to beat that. They don't overdo it either. And it's one of those scores by Bernstein that has, of course, the famous main theme, but also the one that goes right into it after that in the opening credits when you see Calvera's bandits riding into town. Dun, 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 dun. That's his theme. And there are other good music cues in the whole film. You've got plenty of them. And it's pretty fun. The action scenes are pretty awesome.
Yeah, the stunts are out of this world. The action's incredible.
And John Sturges was great at action. Great Escape is a long movie, but it doesn't feel slow or boring. And it is an action movie as well. Last Train from Gun Hill. Although, what's surprising about that movie is how much time Kirk Douglas spends in that hotel room with the guy he's trying to take back, the one who raped and killed his wife. And it's Anthony Quinn's son. Quinn and his guys are outside in the streets and not really doing that much either, but Douglas, for probably half the movie, is stuck in a hotel room. But that movie's got action in it too, but it's also this great two-hander between Douglas and Quinn. We were old friends, but now you're trying to take my son away from me. And you can really see both sides. And Quinn does some terrible things in that movie, and we learned he did terrible things before it, but you still do feel for him. Calvera doesn't get as much of that in this movie. Eli Wallach was a good actor, a little over the top always, especially in The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, even though he's great in that film. And you don't get as much of a reason to feel for him as you do for Quinn in Last Train from Gun Hill, which was only a year before this, by the way. That was 59. This is 1960. But Wallach gets some of the same thing, too, when you have that scene where he talks about how, well, we're starving. We got to take from these people or we'll die. But it's even more of a good arc for a villain in Last Train from Gun Hill. So Sturges directing this is another reason why I like it so much. He's a great director. He's one of the more underrated directors. I also love, too, that such different people have the same last name. Not exactly the same time frame, but Preston Sturges did rom-coms and just comedies in general. Some of which you loved and some of which you didn't. And I love most of them. And then, or at least like most of them. And then you got this guy, who I like even more, that did these action films for the most part.
Do you get any delight out of just the sheer coolness of these characters?
Yeah.
Living through them and
I obviously do when I
wanting
say
to be
that
like them?
My favorite is the guy that I'm not really feeling is my favorite anymore, that we've talked about it for a while here, but Coburn. Mm-hmm. But there's so little depth to him. Actually, Calvera's got more depth than he does.
But you want to be that guy.
I guess so.
And then there's just the pleasure of living through these characters, too. It's done so well. This is where I say, it's not an itch that I need scratched. The appeal of this movie is just not something that typically appeals to me, but I can see how it's such a well-done film, and that particular element of the cool guy hero has got to win a lot of people over and make it the rewatchable film. Not just the good film, but the film that you want to keep coming back to over and over so you can indulge in that feeling again.
Yeah. And we get some women in this movie. It just takes a little while for them to show up. But,
Not that many women.
But Petra.
So many Westerns are terrible for this. I remember talking about this when we covered The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. There's like one woman in the whole town. No wonder they're all fighting over her. There's another woman who's married, but there's dozens, if not over 100 men in that movie and 2 women. Are you telling me that every town in the West was a 10-to-1 ratio of men to women?
I think there'd be more women than men because the guys are the ones who are dying in gunfights.
Yeah, you're right.
Maybe not in reality, but in TV and movies they are. Yeah, so Petra is played by Rosenda Monteros, and she's quite lovely.
At least it makes sense. The movie does explain that the women are all hiding. They don't want to be raped by the gunslingers.
And she shows up after the Toro scene, where Chico is playing with a bull and acting like he's a bullfighter, just to give him some personality and something to do. It's fun.
Oh, and something to rationalize him choosing to stay with the villagers at the end, too. He falls in love with her. He's like such a kid. They cast an older actor, but he's clearly meant to be playing somebody who's probably like 18, 19 years old, right? Yeah. And he plays this real immaturity. I totally believe that he could be dissuaded from the lifestyle just by seeing what these guys are like and what it's actually like and when you're living it, and being dissuaded just because a cute girl falls for him and pursues him rather aggressively, but you believe it. Their little love story. I buy that he would give up on the life. And
yeah, she wants him even more than he wants her, and he wants her back. I guess we talked about this a few minutes ago a little bit, but this is another reason why this movie has some good depth, and that's when the 7 discuss quitting, because the villagers are talking about doing that too. And you talked already about Calvera's men surrounding them and offering the bargain, and doesn't kill them. They have no choice. They surrender their guns and leave town. One of the guys from Calvera's group rides with them and drops the guns on the ground. There's an awful lot of trust there. And Calvera's a bad guy, but he is betrayed by the fact he says, hey, you guys can leave. No shame, go back to America. But they don't. One thing I like, again, another little touch here, is Coburn. The instant those guns hit the ground, he's off his horse and grabbing his gun belt. It's on his waist within maybe a second and a half after they're dropped on the ground by Calvera's guy. And they decide to go back, except for Harry, who refuses to until, of course, this is a fairly typical thing in movies, rides in heroically and dies almost immediately.
I know. I'll save you. Yeah, he's done for.
And it's also poetic the way some of them die, because Lee, the Robert Vaughn character, gathers the courage to go in and shoot 3 or 4 Calvera guys that are holding some of the Mexicans hostage. But then when he goes out of that little house, he gets shot and killed. Bernardo saves these 3 kids who should not be anywhere near them. No. Earlier, they'd been talking about how their fathers are cowards, and he grabbed one of them and spanked his bum. Your father's uncoward. I'm doing Bronson. I don't know if I'm doing Bronson very well. I won't do Bronson. They're not cowards. They're the tough guys by raising kids. But Bernardo gets shot because he's exposed, and he's trying to stop these 3 kids from being in the middle of the gunfight.
Dumb kids.
So there's a lot of poetic ways that these guys die. Britt dies in the middle of trying to throw one of his knives, and he hits a pillar in front of him or something instead.
Yul Brynner gets the best scene. Of course, he doesn't die. He gets to kill the lead bandit. He gets to kill Calvera. And while Calvera's dying, he's legitimately confused, and he says, why did you come back for this town, for these people? I love that Brynner's response is just to kill him.
He doesn't say anything.
He doesn't give him an answer. We as the audience understand the answer just as any decent human being would intrinsically understand the answer. And I love that he's like, I don't owe you an explanation. I don't need to say this out loud. If you don't get it, you're never going to get it.
It was the right thing to do. That's why he did it. Yeah, he didn't say that. And that's smart. They didn't put that in the screenplay.
I love that. It's a nice, sophisticated touch. The screenplay's really quite good. For a movie that is an action film, it's just better than it needs to be.
Thoughtful.
This story, and maybe that's because they're drawing from this incredible source material, one of the greatest films ever made, Seven Samurai. So you already have such a great bedrock of a story to start with, but they don't betray it. They definitely Hollywoodize it, but it still feels like they understand the point of the movie and the depth of the movie. And there's just real elegance. There's elegance to the dialogue or to the lack of dialogue when they don't need to say anything more than what they say. Into moments like that where they just let it play out in this mature way instead of putting all the writing on the wall.
You're asking why I love the movie. These are reasons why, too.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
Also, a touch I didn't notice before, but I read this in the trivia. We never see the gunman who killed the 4 guys. There's no close-up of one of the guys as he shoots Bernardo. There's no close-up on another guy when he kills Lee, or the other guy when he kills Britt. They're shot, and we know they are. We hear the bullets. We see them take the bullets. Better than we saw so many 40s noir deaths. Ooh, constipation.
Not that far from that, though.
Well, they're better than that.
Yeah.
But it's a good touch. We don't see who actually kills them. They're mostly faceless people in Calvary's band, apart from him. Then the guys ride off, and Chico stays with Petra, but they lost. We always lose. I already mentioned Brynner was in the 10 Commandments and won the Oscar for The King and I in 1956, 4 years before this. And then a few years after this, 13 years after this, he was the robot, or the cyborg, whatever, in Westworld, dressed very similarly to how he's dressed in this, too. Steve McQueen was in The Great Escape 3 years later for Sturges, and also did Bullet, which I covered a few months ago. And they did a few films with Sam Peckinpah in the 70s, and at least The Getaway, if not other ones they did together, that was a monster hit. The other ones maybe weren't so much, but that was a very big hit, and that's where he met Ally McGraw, who had been with Robert Evans, and then she was with McQueen. Coburn was in The Great Escape as well. He also had a cameo in The Muppet Movie and a cameo in The Player, and he won the Oscar in 1998 for Affliction, Best Supporting Actor, the Nick Nolte movie. Bronson. And of course, even though this isn't this movie, I'm going to do the quote. I've been doing this forever. In The Great Escape, "What are you doing? Sweeping up. What are you doing? Sitting here? What are you doing, Bronson? Shower. Need the whoosh." I need the whoosh.
With his Polish, scare quotes, Polish accent.
And Bernardo O'Reilly suggests he's both, I guess, Hispanic and Irish.
I think he has a Mexican mother and an Irish father.
That's what he says?
I think they say that explicitly.
Okay, yeah. And he's also in Once Upon a Time in the West. He's quite good in that, actually, as the Avenging Angel against the bad guy, Henry Fonda. That was later this decade. Robert Vaughn was in Bullet and The Towering Inferno, also with Steve McQueen. And Basketball, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies quite a few years ago. Horst Buchholz never really took off, even though apparently Sturges thought he would be the breakout star from this movie. I think it's Coburn on the commentary says something about that, and then, no. I must say, no, the kid wasn't cutting it. He's good in the movie. I don't know what you mean by that, but it's probably also a matter of feeling a little bit, no, I'm the one who's the breakout star.
Right.
Maybe, well, not Brad Dexter. It wouldn't have been him either, but...
His performance is a little much. It's funny, he's probably one of the youngest members of the cast, but his performance seems the most old-fashioned. The most, gee, golly, way too punchy acting technique where he was overdoing it. Great-looking guy, though.
Oh, yeah. He was only 26 when they were shooting this, incidentally, so he was pretty young. And he is German, not, of course, Hispanic. He was in 1, 2, 3 for Wilder, one of the titles we've probably never discussed before, where Jimmy Cagney is the star of that. That was after this, I believe. And later he was in Life is Beautiful. In fact, when you click on Horst Buchholz, which I just did on IMDb, the thing where you see play trailer from a movie they're in, it's Life is Beautiful.
Huh.
Brad Dexter was in Last Train from Gun Hill for Sturges, which we just talked about, and also The Asphalt Jungle. So when people said these guys were unknowns, no, they were in other movies, just not the name that Brynner was. Eli Wallach was in The Godfather Part 2 and Tuco in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Whit Bissell's in this. He was in HUD. Love HUD. Another pseudo-Western, more of a modern film, and really just set on a farm. Not really a Western, I guess. That was in 1963, same year as Great Escape. Neither one of those were nominated for Best Picture, and yet they're probably the two best pictures of 1963.
What won in 1963?
Tom Jones. And Bing Russell's in this, too. He worked with his son, Kurt Russell, quite a lot. Not in this, of course, though. Kurt was still too young, I guess. John Sturges was both producer and director on this. He directed The Great Escape 3 years later, of course. His only nomination ever for directing was for Bad Day at Black Rock, which was in the 50s. Spencer Tracy film. Pretty solid. Not a Western, I don't think, though. I think it's a modern set film in the 50s. Also, Gunfight at the OK Corral. There's another one. I forgot about that. That was 57. That's the Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday story with Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. And then Last Train from Gun Hill with Douglas before this. Kurosawa saw this movie, apparently loved it, and it pleased Sturges as much as anything else would have. Mm-hmm. So if he'd been nominated for an Oscar, he probably would have thought, no, Kurosawa liking it. That means more to me than anything else. The writers, we haven't mentioned this at all. There's another big thing online about this. William Roberts is the one who got credit for this. He wrote other action-adventure picks. Nothing really stood out that much I didn't see. But apparently Walter Newman should have been the one that was thought of as the main writer. But some brouhaha happened, and he pulled his name off the movie and that kind of thing.
They had to rewrite parts of the script to satisfy the Mexican censors.
Right, and Newman wasn't there to do that.
Yeah, and so they had to hire someone else to make the changes.
That was Roberts.
And then I've heard two different things. I heard one that he took his name off, like, well, if you're going to make changes to my script, then forget it. And I heard that Roberts got the credit and that he was furious about it. So I'm not sure which story is true, but just about every account says that it was his script that made the screen.
With some changes, yeah. Walter Bernstein's also uncredited, and there's a whole story about him. And then you look on IMDb, and you've got all the Japanese guys, Kurosawa, Shinobu Hashimoto, and Hideo Igumi, who wrote Seven Samurai. And by the way, one of the reasons this is called The Magnificent Seven is because that's what Seven Samurai apparently was called in some parts of America when it was screened here.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
The producer, executive producer, I guess, because Sturges did produce his own film, Walter Mirisch, who won an Oscar for In the Heat of the Night, which we covered many years ago, and also won the Thalberg Award and the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award. So he's been at the Oscars many times and has taken home awards many times over. The movie's 235-1. We watched our Blu-ray. It's probably available in many places. I think I read somewhere that Wizard of Oz is the most screened movie on TV ever, and this is second. Really? I don't know if I believe that, but if it's even in the top 10, that's impressive.
I've never seen it on TV.
That's what I'm thinking, too, yeah. Cinematographer Charles Lang Jr., I believe, shot Last Train from Gun Hill. I think I saw that name when we watched the movie. Also, She Done Him Wrong, which I covered back in January, and Some Like It Hot, which was the year before this. Completely different film, black and white, comedy. And he shot many others for Sturges. The editor, Ferris Webster, cut Blackboard Jungle. We covered that many years ago. The Manchurian Candidate. What a great film that was. That was after this. And The Great Escape. He was nominated for that, but not for this. That's the thing. These two classic movies that Sturges made, one Oscar nomination each. The score for this one and the editing for that, and that was it. And they could have gotten all kinds of other ones, including some of the big ones. And the composer, Elmer Bernstein, with this classic score, the 8th time we've covered him. We did The Ten Commandments, Sweet Smell of Success, To Kill a Mockingbird, which I think is also on the scores list, by the way, somewhere in the top 25. HUD, The Great Escape, Ghostbusters, and Far From Heaven, and also The Babe, which Chris and I did on scoring at the movie. So Bernstein has been talked about a lot by me over the years, and I, of course, do love, especially the main theme, with this whole score. So what do you think of the look, the cutting, and the score?
Oh, the technicals are amazing. This is just an immaculately made film. Everything really comes together.
I agree 100%. I already did what happens next. That is that Chico is going to need some help because something's going to happen in this village. But he probably marries Petra, has a lot of kids with her, and hopefully is, well, maybe they all are always on the lookout and on the ready for something to happen. Have those people on the lookout like they are through the whole story all the time. And Chris and Vin, what do they do? Who knows?
Yeah.
Make it Vin. I love when McQueen does that. What's your name? Make it Vin. Okay, then last thoughts on our last movie of November, The Magnificent Seven.
Well, it may not be the target audience for this film, but there's no denying it is so well made. I'm so glad I finally watched it.
I love the film. It's one of the most fun westerns, despite the sadness. The guys, especially Chris, are very self-aware of their own growing irrelevance. And their lives were desperate before they took this job. What do they do now? But the film itself is more fun to watch when you know about how they're all trying to cool it up on screen and one-up each other. Brynner's good, but McQueen's terrific. And so are the other five guys, really.
Yeah.
Bronson, for all the talk about, hey, Bronson doing the same thing, and he does do the same thing in most movies. But when you cast him in the right role, he's good. You put him in a role where he can excel.
This is a movie with like a zillion characters, and it is way easier said than done to have 7 protagonists and have each of them stand out on their own merit and have a unique characterization that you never confuse one with the other. Each actor really kills it.
You talk about stardom, too. Brynner already was. McQueen was getting there. Certainly became a huge star as the 60s and into the 70s played out. Eli Wallach, probably not quite a star, but Bronson became a huge name. So of the 7, maybe Robert Vaughn, arguably, James Coburn as well, all leading men in different things. So apart from Brad Dexter and Horst Buchholz, you could say that 5 of the 7 and really 6 of the 8 with Eli Wallach became pretty damn big names. Okay, that was The Magnificent Seven. On Friday, I'll be back in your ears, and I'll be talking all on my own, as is the Friday custom. The movie I'll be digging into on December 1st will take us back into the world of comedy and romance. And also crime, by the way. So crime here in a way, crime in that. The last time Howard Hawks came up on this channel was when I covered Paul Munian's Scarface, big-time crime film. That was a few months ago. But this time it'll be Barbara Stanwyck and Gary Cooper flirting and falling for each other in Ball of Fire. That will be a solo show. The next time my wife will be here with me will be on Monday, December 4th, so next week, when we'll analyze the comedy stylings of that odd couple, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, in Grumpy Old Men, which is a Christmas movie of sorts. The end is set at Christmas. The coming attraction is opinion question, so opinion, for the somewhat Christmas movie, Grumpy Old Men. The outtakes at the end of the movie are pretty famous, and doing that during the end credits wasn't as common 30 years ago as it became. Mixed in with takes of Lemmon and Matthau blowing their lines, especially Matthau blowing his lines over and over again, and that's pretty funny, is Burgess Meredith rattling off all kinds of off-color expressions for what their friend Chuck is about to do with Anne Margaret. Which would you say is his funniest one-liner? And it's a long list of good ones.
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Grumpy Old Men. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. And if you like us, why don't you leave us a rating and a review that helps listeners find us? It's a great way to support the podcast. We're both on Twitter,
Twittix.
I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email, haveyouvseenpodcast@gmail.com.
Twixer.
You can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
We lost. We'll always lose. So let's ride away and end this podcast.
And cut.